Thank you. We have a wonderful panel here today, so we want to start as soon as possible. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you today Dr. Anthony Hassan, Clinical Associate Professor and Director of the Center for Innovative Research on Veterans and Military Families. Dr. Hassan is no stranger to helping veterans. As we know, he's had over 25 years of experience. He served in numerous operations, including Iraq Freedom in 2004. It was the first ever Air Force Combat Stress Control and Prevention team embedded with an Army unit. Dr. Hassan has said that one of the lessons he's learned from his work is that social workers, health practitioners, and employers need to understand the military culture and to make the connection on their first encounter. Quote, "We are framed and guided by core values. You should know what we live by. Our experiences and what we believed in," he said, "is important." Thank you, Dr. Hassan.
Thank you, Dr. Shore. It is my sincere pleasure to be in front of you today. A lesson for all of you is that sometimes you can push and push and push and never get anything accomplished, and sometimes it's okay to sit back and let it happen. And what I'm saying is, for the last 4 years, I've been trying to get all school day to talk about this issue, and every time I'd bring it up, people would shut me down. So I just stopped bringing it up, and look what happened. I had no idea that this was going to happen just 3 months ago, so I'm very, very excited and happy, and I'm actually privileged to be up here with my colleagues here, who I'll introduce you to in a minute. I have a couple of minutes, and that's all I have to talk, and so I said, well, what can I say in a couple of minutes? So I thought I'd be a bit dramatic and share with you something I put together the other night as I was thinking about what I'm going to talk about today. So let me get started. Before I get started, I want everyone on the VAC to know that I'm extremely, extremely happy about all of you who now have access to this world-class education at USC. But most importantly for me, and for being the chair of the Military Social Work Program, is the large number of military spouses who now have the opportunity to get an education that can be transferred anywhere they move, to have a profession that they'll always have a job on a base or near a base, and to all the veterans who now have access, those who are wounded and unable to come to class, have access all across the United States to get our degree, but to get the degree in military social work. So for the large number of military spouses and veterans on the platform, I'm so happy you're here, and if there's anything we can do to make your experience better, let me know. Of course, that goes for all of you on the ground, but they've taken over. There's about 300 of them on the web, and there's about 100 of you in the military on the ground. And of the 300 on the web, about 30% are spouses or veterans, so I'm really excited about that. So let me get on with my piece about being a bit dramatic. So, I'm coming home is what I titled this. I'm coming home after serving my country in war and peacetime. I may not be one of the 15% with PTSD or the 10% with TBI, but I might be. I may not be one of the 50,000 wounded or severely wounded, but I might be. I may not be college educated or civilian job ready, but I might be. I'm a veteran of the United States military, and I'm coming home. I voluntarily joined the military for whatever reason: patriotism, family tradition, hardship, education, citizenship, Maybe I was running from something or running to something, but I joined and I served. I lived in a culture that is quite different from yours, that is your civilian culture, in that I lived by different laws and lived by different customs and traditions, things that I could do in the civilian community I couldn't do in the military. I'm a member of what I call your new diversity group. Remember, we were never in your military was never in your social work textbooks. We weren't in journals. We weren't talked about in class. So I am your new diversity group. I have served in an occupation quite different from yours, perhaps. I've been trained to kill, kind of. I've moved every 2 to 3 years. I couldn't just quit my job or disobey the orders of those appointed over me. When they told me to go, I had to go. I had to give up everything, all my freedoms and rights, because that's what I signed up for. I went to war and to other terrible places so that others can live without fear, oppression, hardship. I've sacrificed. My family has served and endured hardships along the way, which might be quite different than your families. They've had frequent school changes for the children, regular and lengthy deployments and separation from your spouse and children. They've experienced anxiety over the fact that am I coming home, and if I do come home, am I the same person or not? Family members with limited choice who, despite these hardships, serve side by side with the service member selflessly. I'm a veteran of the United States military. I'm coming home, perhaps with a family. I may need a leg up, but not a handout. I may need mentoring on civilian employment and college education. I may need culturally competent clinicians to help me with some of my challenges as I transition home. I may need assistance navigating unfamiliar community resources available to my family and me. I may need you to take a chance on me. I'm a veteran of the United States military and I'm coming home. I want you to know that I've committed precious years of my life in the service to our country. I've endured hardship in the face of danger. I've helped others who couldn't help themselves. I protected the rights and freedoms of you and all of our fellow citizens and those who are less fortunate. And over 6,000 men and women I've served with have lost their lives in the defense of this country or protecting the rights of others. I am a veteran of the United States military and I'm coming home. I ask you, are you ready? Is this community of Los Angeles or the communities across America ready? Is our country ready? Ready to honor a moral obligation, which I believe all of us have, to ensure that all of the veterans and their families receive the services promised to them when they raise their right hand, and to completely address any of the injuries, illnesses, or disparities that have been created as a result of my service. I'm a veteran of the United States military. I'm coming home. Are you ready? I might be. I just want to close with a statement here that I understand the importance of trying to debunk these growing stereotypes about veterans who are broken, but the fact is we can't deny the truth that our all-voluntary force has been terribly impacted by years of war. And what is wrong with telling that truth? What is wrong with telling the truth that military mental health is challenged and has a problem, and it's not just a societal problem, it's a military problem, it's a veteran and family member problem that we have to address. We cannot deny the occupational hazards of this profession, nor can we deny the impact of war. Our experiences are different than those of civilians, and it just drives me nuts when people try to compare us or put us side by side with those who haven't been where we've been. Civilians need to know that some of us coming home will be challenged. Some of us will adjust just fine, but we'll need to adjust. And frankly, I'm still adjusting. And then some of us will rise to greatness immediately, like my colleagues on this panel today. We are all not broken, and I'm not here to say we're not broken. But we're not all great and going to do wonderfully well. And there is a lot of us that just need a little bit of time and support as we find our way into our new community. Facing unpleasant facts like this takes courage. Ensuring our veterans get the help they need takes leadership. Therefore, I need all of you to be the leaders in this community and the communities across America to do the right thing and to help a veteran with a leg up and not a helping handout. So with that, I want to move on to what we're here to talk about and learn about and look at the diversity of issues that we're confronted with as we talk about supporting the men and women who serve this country when they come home. And our panel has 3 different topics to talk about today. Dr. Carl Castro, a friend, a well-known researcher, a colonel, retired United States Army. All of you know because you've read his work in the military specialization. Carl Castro is going to talk about the mental and physical health of veterans transitioning home. My dear friend and colleague, Major Kim Finney. Yeah, she's all right, huh? I'm very, very happy to know her, a fellow Air Force mental health officer, psychologist, who's an amazing therapist, an amazing leader, and as you know, an amazing instructor in the classroom. Kim Finney's going to talk about military cultural factors and the basis for treatment. And finally, one of yours, an alumni of your program, a military veteran, United States Marine Corps Captain, Kristin Cavanaugh, who I'm proud to know, who has courage, who has leadership, and who takes on tough challenges despite what others might think. Kristin is going to talk about the transition from a macro perspective and some unique aspects of that. So what I want to do is turn over the floor to them. They're each going to have just 8 minutes. And as good military officers, they're going to stay within those 8 minutes. And as a good military officer, I'm going to remind them when they're not in stride with what I'm asking of them. And then we'll go into question and answer. And as a good military officer, I expect your questions to be short, concise, and to the point. So let's keep that in mind as we move forward. So if I may, turn it over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Carl Castro.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. And could I just see one more time, have all the veterans stand up in the room? Excellent, excellent. Excellent. I really like to know where my friends are, so thank you all for standing up. I only have 8 minutes, so I'm just going to jump right into this. And one of the things that, well, there's actually sort of, I guess, 4 points I want to make. As social workers, first-year social workers, you're going to have a year left. For those of you who are leaving this semester, I just want to congratulate you. You're really leaving from a great place. But there are just a couple of things that I want to leave you with that I think you should always keep in mind that's relevant, not just for veterans, but for no matter who you come in contact with and who you're trying to help. And the first thing is always question numbers and data that people give you. Okay, you heard some numbers that people give, and they say, well, it's 1% veterans, is it higher, is it 4%, what exactly is the number, how many people who've been in combat have PTSD? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Is it 12%? Is it 10%? Is it 70%? And I'm giving you numbers, and I can give you references that would support all these numbers, even as low as 2 and 3%. So it's really, really important that when you look at numbers, when someone gives you a number that doesn't make any sense, that you say, that doesn't make any sense, I'm going to look that up. And even if you think you have a number that you're sure is right, you need to double check your number, okay? As a famous comic critique, social critic, Mark Twain once said, there's a lot of things we know that just ain't so, okay? So one of the things I want to start off with was one important number, and I hope you remember this, and that is 53% of every OIF, OEF veteran who leaves the military goes to the Department of Veterans Affairs. Okay? 53%. Is 53% a majority? Is it a significant minority? Is it 3%? Is it 4%? Is it 5%? No, it's 53%. So 53% of veterans go to the VA. They go to the VA for a variety of reasons, both mental health related and physical health related. The military service places a tremendous physical burden on the service member. For those of you who've served, you can attest to that. It's physically very hard and very demanding. Many veterans leave with musculoskeletal injuries that people don't count as being combat related, right? Because you can get a physical injury playing basketball, carrying a rucksack, training. Well, that's not combat, but it's part of the military life. And what happens if you have a musculoskeletal injury that doesn't heal? It's called chronic pain. And how do people treat chronic pain? Either through self-medication, alcohol, illegal drug use, borrowing prescription drugs from other people. You can see how the problems can magnify. So as a social worker, please do not just focus on the psychological and mental health. Also focus on the physical health. Okay? Second point, relationships. Dr. Ho gave a brilliant summary and some details of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder and talked about symptoms and reactions to traumatic events. But really, if you look at all the impairments, with one exception, they all evolve around relationships. They evolve around personal relationships with partners and friends and family. They evolve around relationships with colleagues at work. They evolve around relationships with community. Assess relationships. I would encourage you not just to have discussions about their symptoms and reactions, but have discussions with them about their relationships and how they're working. Okay, relationships to me is the linchpin of living a happy and productive life. And this kind of moves into the personal aspects. Ask a veteran. I think veterans are entitled to live a happy and productive life as they define it. Not as I define it, not as you define it, but as they define it. If they are living a happy and productive life, that nobody likes them, their wife hates them, their husband hates them, they can't keep a job, if they're happy, knock yourself out. If you're not happy, though, then that's where you can come in. And is it a relationship issue or is it a personal issue? Okay? So again, you have to meet the veteran where they are and what they want. Okay? Focus on relationships and also focus on the physical health aspects just as much as you will the psychological or mental health aspects. Okay? Thank you very much.
Hi. Let's see. It's still morning. Good morning, everyone. I want to start off with a couple take-home points for you. First, I want to say that the term soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, warrior are all terms that we use because it conveniently paints a picture or an image for you. I also want to tell you that warriors don't show up in our outpatient clinics. The person does. So you end up treating the person. And as such, their personal experiences as well as their interpersonal experiences are delicately colored with their gender as well as their race and ethnicity. And women, as well as people of color, to include men, and that other subsection of women, have a different experience. Not just in the military, but even when they transition, that are different than our white male counterparts. So those are some take-homes that I want to give you right up front. Now I want to transition, and I want to tell you about Annie. And Annie was a 20-something-year-old white female that came into my clinic. She served roughly about 8 years in the military, and she was a military policewoman. She's very ambivalent about therapy. She really wasn't sure if she should even be there. But the fact of the matter is that she was returned early from a deployment in Iraq. One evening, she got up to go to the restroom, and AKA the porta potties, and someone came from behind her with a sharp object, and they raped her. And it was extremely traumatic for her, not just psychologically, emotionally, but physically as well. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. I mean, you all know and are familiar with the signs and symptoms related to post-traumatic stress disorder. But I also want to share with you some of the contextual factors related to being in the military when such an event occurs. And those military cultural factors that can sometimes inhibit or become barriers for treatment. So it makes it a little different. In fact, I sometimes talk about it as compound infractions. And hopefully you'll see why later. I also assume that you all can kind of somewhat identify what Annie may have been going through, and then kind of take that and multiply that by 10, because this was her second rape in uniform that had occurred. The first rape occurred while she was in basic training, and it was another trainee within her unit that assaulted her. And in between those rapes, she had experienced some sexual harassment from the guys in her unit. But overall, Annie loved the military. She loved being a military policewoman as well. She didn't enjoy or like at all the objectification as well as the minimizing that occurs just by the nature of her gender. A little bit more about her ambivalence. She was ambivalent because she wasn't sure if her career would be ruined by coming to seek services in the mental health clinic. She wasn't sure if her chain of command would see her as weak. And what I mean by chain of command is that it's a very specific, linear line of who's in charge of who in the military. So most service members will know their immediate supervisor, their supervisor's supervisor, and that supervisor's supervisor, and so on and so forth. And from a macro perspective, they are somewhat the gatekeepers, if you will, of promotions, pay raises, those jobs that everybody wants and performs at their best to get. So that created the ambivalence. Part of her felt like she needed to be there, but her career and being there meant more to her. Another military cultural factor I want to kind of describe and share with you is good order and discipline. Military units that good order and discipline is one of the foundations in which they operate as a team to accomplish tasks, to get the mission done. It is not very tolerant of injustices or unfairness. But in Annie's case, she did experience some injustices and unfairness. In fact, some of the unit described her as a troublemaker. Some of them said, she's just trying to get out of work. And others said, I don't know why you just don't kind of suck it up and just move on. Which created other hurdles and challenges for her and trying to work through those. She couldn't just say, you know what, I quit. I'm going to write a resignation letter, take it in, and give it to my supervisor. Or not show up due to illness out of fear of going AWOL, which is absence without leave. Needless to say that over time, the pressures got to be a little bit too much. And again, she really loved her job. So Annie prematurely terminated treatment and went back to work. And I can exchange Annie's story with Veronica's story, who just had given birth to her fourth child and had postpartum depression, but she loved being in the military and fear of losing her job. She also prematurely terminated treatment. Or a young African American male who was deployed, no combat setting, from LA area, deployed, and some of his unit members decided it was a good idea to hang a noose in his tent and try and put his head through it. He came back with significant problems, just feeling overwhelmed and trying to make sense of what happened to him. Excessive alcohol, got into treatment, and eventually left the military. And I can go on and on in stories, but my point is there are cultural barriers, there are military cultural barriers that impede treatment or service members prematurely drop out of treatment. And they're not combat-related injuries, but they are injuries that resulted in some type of emotional or physical trauma. And I wanted to put that population on the table, give that population a voice, and have a conversation on how do you reach those people as they're transitioning as well. Thank you.
I want to take a look at transition from a different perspective. So what does transition look like if we look at it top-down from the policy side down to troop-level boots on the ground? So we're going to take a look at the macro perspective. A lot of people say that the military isn't a social experiment. You hear that over and over again. But if you look at the history of the military and history of some of the policies, like the integration of African Americans, the integration of women into the military, those policies happened a lot sooner in the military than they did in the civilian world. And so in some cases, the military is a social experiment that pushes civilian society along. Dr. Finney was talking about the cultural side of the military. I would argue that some of the policies that we put in place change the culture or reinforce the culture of the military. Sometimes those policies work, like the integration of African Americans, like the integration of women. But there are times when those policies inhibit transition. And so I want to give you a little bit of background about a policy that many of you have probably heard a lot about the last couple of years while you were in school, and that's the don't ask, don't tell policy. So a little history about the LGBT community in the military, and then the impacts and challenges on that community. So back in the 1950s, mid-20th century, it was illegal for gays and lesbians to serve in the military, period. And so if your chain of command or someone found out that you were gay or lesbian, you could be incarcerated, you could be institutionalized, or you could be discharged with a undesirable label on your discharge paperwork. And so you can imagine the impact that had on gay and lesbian service members at that time, even just having been labeled undesirable on a piece of paper. If you think about that, trying to go to get a job or explain undesirable and what that means, and the stigma that comes along with having that label put on you, maybe for an 18 or 19-year-old person living with that for the rest of their lives. So that was in place for decades. And the military culture changed somewhat, but it still wasn't tolerant or accepting of the LGBT population. If you look at the 80s, that's when they went through the witch hunt phase, where even just the perception of someone thinking that you were gay or thinking you were a lesbian could have you just discharged with no evidence, and your career was over. So that was the culture that we were living in, a culture where there was zero tolerance, and the policies enforced that zero tolerance. In 1993, Bill Clinton enacted a policy called Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Don't Pursue. And so he put that in place, and it was supposed to compromise. So it made serving, it wasn't illegal anymore. So you were allowed to serve if you were gay, lesbian, or bisexual. But you weren't allowed to talk about it. You weren't allowed to ask about it. And you weren't it was supposed to get rid of the witch hunts, which sounds like a great idea. It sounds like a great compromise. You can't ask, I can't tell. Well, what it didn't take into account were all the ways that service members ask and tell on a daily basis. Just asking about your weekend. If you have a spouse or you're dating someone, then it's hard to talk about your weekend plans without mentioning that person or without mentioning your family members. When you're leaving on deployment and your family comes to see you off, it's hard to explain who those individuals are and not have questions asked. I mean, you can only have so many cousins and aunts and uncles. And so the policy put gay and lesbian service members in a position where they were forced to lie about who they were in order to keep their job. If you think about that in terms of transition, here was an organization that they had given maybe a large majority of their life, their young adulthood to, that once they got out did not support them the way that others were supported. To put on top of that, there was another policy put in place called the Defense of Marriage Act, which made marriage, in the eyes of the federal government, between one man and one woman. So what did that mean for LGBT veterans? It meant that even if they lived in states that sanctioned marriage, same-sex marriage, they still weren't eligible for benefits. So we had a situation where we had two classes of people because a couple of policies created a two-class system where you had veterans who were married to opposite-sex couples who were receiving benefits, who had death benefits, who had all these support services, and then another group who were also married that didn't receive any of those services. And so when you think about transition in that sense, during Don't Ask, Don't Tell, those service members didn't have the support that they needed when they got out. Maybe, unfortunately, the service member was killed in action and left behind a family and children, but that family wasn't eligible for the benefits because of the policy. So a lot of organizations decided to start pushing the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And it took a while, but in 2011, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed. And what that meant was LGBT service members were allowed to serve openly. And I like to think of this as a transition inside of a transition. Because if you think about it, you go to work one day and you aren't permitted to serve openly. There's a policy change. The next day you can come to work and you can be whoever you want to be. And so there were a lot of individuals that struggled with that transition, trying to identify who they were and become comfortable with that while still maintaining the standards of the military. A year later, the Defense of Marriage Act was also repealed, or at least a portion of it. And so what that allowed were the benefits that were once kept from spouses, family members, and children. Those were bestowed upon the spouses of gay and lesbian service members' families. And so it equalized the playing field. And what didn't happen, or I guess the fault of it, because we have a policy change, doesn't mean that things are going to change overnight. And what we found was there was no support structure for this transition. Now we have gay and military spouses that want to join base groups. We have gay and lesbian spouses who have never been a part of anything, and so they're kind of in the dark about the entitlements and the benefits they have going on to base and getting an ID and things like that. And so there had to be an entire infrastructure built out to support this whole new population of individuals that no one really ever knew or acknowledged existed. So why am I telling you this about Don't Ask, Don't Tell? So there are policies that work, and there are policies that don't. In our profession, I know that we can tend to get siloed between being clinical and taking care of our caseload and taking care of our clients, and then those of us who are more policy-minded that take a more macro approach. Be mindful that those things can't be siloed. To be a good clinician, you have to understand the impacts, especially if you're dealing with a military population. You have to understand the impacts of the regulations and the laws on your clients. To be a good policy advocate, you have to understand the impacts of the policies that you're making on the boots on the ground. And so I just want to encourage you to do that. Take some time to learn about the policies. I think Dr. Hassan mentioned it when he first came up here. This is about understanding. And so the big picture is to understand military culture is to also understand the policies that are affecting your clients. And I guess lastly, I just want to be an advocate here. There's room for policy wonks in our profession. So if you're policy minded, we need you guys too. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. What a great group of folks here that we have. Their experiences are quite broad and deep. I hope you take advantage of this opportunity now and please ask your questions. I just ask that you ask your question and allow us to answer it. Please come forward to the mics. We'd love to hear from you. I'm sure my colleagues would love to give you some more information. There we go. I was afraid I'd have to pull out some of these canned kind of questions, trying to avoid that. I have a couple jokes, too, if we get bored. Okay, so high up on top. Oh, I'm sorry, over here.
Hi, thank you all for your insight. My name is Christopher Mottram from the Skirball Academic Center. In regards to the term PTSD, this statement in question is a compilation of multiple qualitative interactions. I am extremely confused as to why I would volunteer to serve my country, get exposed to the atrocities of war, experience the natural evolution of physiological and psychological changes that arise as a result of said exposures, and then be expected to seek help and align myself with a false reality that I now have a disorder, talk about stigma. What is it going to take to drop the D and normalize the realities of war and not consider these conditions a disorder?
I think that's for you, Dr. Castro. What's it going to take to drop the D on PTSD? I love this position I'm in. By the way, I'm the major and they're the colonels, and so I get to do this kind of stuff.
Thank you for that's a very interesting question, and you know, this topic has been debated, I guess, now for about 8 years within the Department of Defense and the Department of Veterans Affairs on whether or not, you know, you should say post-traumatic stress or you should say post-traumatic stress disorder. It's often credited with General Corelli, but actually it was discussed many years before he even took office. And, you know, there's pros and cons to both. And, you know, you can say, well, is any sort of reaction that's expected, does that just go into the post-traumatic stress camp? And it's only when it results in an impairment, because you have to keep in mind that, you know, that the DSM-IV is very clear that you need symptoms, reactions, a time course, right, and an impairment. And oftentimes people will just say, you have PTSD, but there's no noticeable impairment. So one of the myths around post-traumatic stress disorder, and something that Dr. Hogue alluded to, and that is you can have a lot of symptoms associated with post-traumatic stress disorder and be very high functioning, very high functioning. And in fact, that's true for all mental health disorders. You know, I often ask, how many of you have worked with a boss or supervisor who you were convinced had a personality disorder and wonder how they got the job, right? So it goes to speak, but I think, you know, you're really getting at a larger issue, and that's the use of language, which I think Dr. Hogue did a wonderful job talking about. A lot of people want to know what it is they have so they can wrap their head around it. A lot of people do not want a label. And I think as clinicians, you just need to be sensitive to which of those do you think is in the best interest of your client. And so I wouldn't say, I'm very ambivalent about dropping the D or keeping the D. I see it could lead to confusion. If I'm a veteran and I have post-traumatic stress disorder and that's what's driving my disability, and then all of a sudden you say, I don't have the disorder anymore, I'm immediately concerned about the status of my disability. Are you trying to take away my disability? Are you trying to normalize my suffering? And, you know, so these are real issues that have to be really discussed and grappled with, and make sure whatever happens, and this is my policy, whatever happens, we always want to keep the health and well-being of the veteran front and center. Anything that jeopardizes that, I'm completely against.
Thank you.
Anyway, that's my comment.
Thank you. Great question. Thanks, Dr. Castro. Next.
My name is Irene Hernandez, and I have a comment. I just want to say thank you so much, Professor, for exposing the cultural ramifications of the nationally oppressed minorities in the United States. And oftentimes our people are marginalized anyway. And then that extra layer of militarization and all the cultural ramifications that they experience there. And so it really does behoove us as social workers to be sensitive to those aspects. And so I just couldn't sit in my seat without coming forward and thanking you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, this question is from Nicole Barnes from the VAC, and her question is, how do you feel the passage of MGIA would influence the way the military responds to sexual assault from a social work policy perspective?
And so we're talking about the Sexual Assault Prevention Act that's out. So for those of you that don't know, there's a bill out that wants to take the legal or the judicial piece of sexual assault out of the hands of the chain of command and put it in civilian hands or an outside court. I mean, it's difficult because we'd like to think that our commanders are in place for a reason and that they understand their unit and that they are able to make impartial decisions. But having it in the chain of command is not appropriate because you don't have that impartial person making the final judgment. And if we're not holding people accountable, then how can we expect the culture to change past a culture that's letting sexual assault happen and occur and letting people not be held accountable for it? So I think it's a good idea.
I would also like to add something to that. I sit on a scientific advisory board for sexual assault for the Air Force, even though I'm in the Army. So you can see who they come to. Where's the Army guys? They come to the Army guys. So
you don't believe that, do you?
And here's again some statistics that are important to understand. Sexual assault is the most underreported crime, not just in the military, not just in the United States, but in the world. It is the most underreported crime. And sexual assault is a crime. Within the Department of Defense, only 10% of all sexual assaults, it's estimated about 10% of all sexual assaults are ever reported through any mechanism. Of the 10% reported, around 1% result in a conviction. So if you think about it's 1% of the whole 10% of 100, and 10% of that is 1%. Okay? So 1% result in a conviction. This law that we're discussing is dealing with 0.05% of the 1%, taking away the right of clemency and trial from the commander. That's not the problem. The problem is getting those who are sexually assaulted to report it, and there are huge barriers and obstacles to doing so. But more importantly, even once they do come forward and report it, the real problem is actually getting a conviction. None of this act actually addresses the fundamental problem around sexual assault. It's the culture, it's the climate, it's individual variables, etc. So, I mean, again, as social workers and advocates at the macro level, when you think of a policy and a law, say, is this law really fundamentally going to change any of that? And quite honestly, it will in maybe a couple of cases, but in the main, where the real issues are, it doesn't address.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. By the way, make sure you check his stats. 10%, 1%, 0.05%.
Always check the stats.
He is Army, by the way, so I'm going to go up. I'm going to kind of go around like this. So up top.
Hi, this is a question on behalf of Michael Fernandez on the VAC, and this is for Ms. Finney. Can the combination of military culture and the culture of ethnicity create complications for the clinician?
I'm sorry, it was somewhat blurred. Can you repeat that?
Sure. Can the combination of military culture and the culture of ethnicity create complications for the clinician?
It can, in terms of where they differ. Most often when individuals come into clinic, if they have the opportunity to do that, and I'm
them a chance. So I think I'm just asking people to give us a chance, not see this as a charity case. You know, this is a new thing. It's like coming to a new country sometimes. It feels very strange, different. And I think as you would greet a person coming to our country, kind, courteous, giving them opportunities, I think that's what I'm asking for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, this question comes from Colleen Shaler from the VAC, and she's wondering, from an intersectional lens, are there different factors of a client you would address first, and why?
I don't know. This is my bad ear.
No problem. I'll repeat it. She's wondering, from an intersectional lens, are there different factors of a client you would address first, and why?
From an intersectional lens, are there different issues or characteristics? Are you saying characteristics?
Factors of a client. Factors of a client.
Okay. That I would address just differently. You know, I will tell you, in my years of being in clinical practice, and I think Seligman initially identified in terms of theoretical orientations and a comparison of theoretical orientations, that genuineness, empathy, and warmth were the key factors in terms of building a therapeutic bond. Genuineness in the sense that I really want to hear you, I really want to know your story, I don't have a combat background, but I want to know you as the person. And then being able to kind of
stop drinking and driving, that's your third DUI. I'm sorry, that's not compatible with military service. You've got to go. Or what is it about the person who comes to work and who's not fit for duty and continues to have personality and relationship problems and just doesn't have a medical diagnosis? I'm sorry, you've got to go. But what happens in the inner circles is that people talk about mental health as being the place that kicked them out. And I just want to remind everybody, it's the behaviors of individuals that cause them the greatest difficulty in life, which is ruins careers and families and relationships. But my colleagues could add to that. But we know that coming to mental health will do nothing but improve your life. And if you have a diagnosis like PTSD that you can't manage, if you have bipolar disorder, or for some reason you develop schizophrenia at the age of 21, I'm just sorry, those are not compatible to military service, but you'll leave with a medical discharge and disability. We're not throwing you in the street because you develop bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. But I am throwing you in the street if you steal, rob, and beat on people while you're wearing the uniform. So there's a difference. And we've made mistakes. We've sent people out with substance abuse and personality disorders that should have been diagnosed with PTSD. And we have done this, and we've made some mistakes. But the majority of the men and women who come to mental health get great care, move on, and have great careers.
And I'll just add, it's really a two-prong approach, because the reality of, you know, you can write policy after policy after policy, but attitude reflects leadership. And if your supervisor snickers, you know, because somebody's going to see mental health, that sets a bad stage. The other side of that, though, is that it's our responsibility as mental health professionals, if you will, to go out and provide outreach and education to the masses and dispelling those myths that are out there and promoting healthy seeking behaviors.
I'm sorry, I have just time for one more question. And I'm looking across.
You're welcome.
I'm looking across and figuring out who should I ask, right? I don't see any money, but that's not money. Anybody got any money here? All right, since you said you, I'll give it to you. She's the last question. I'm so sorry, everybody.
Okay, so I'm Camille Taylor-Diggs. I'm a VAC student. My question is, with all of the veterans that have already been negatively affected by the changes in policy, such as, like you said, them being discharged out the service with, a personality disorder instead of PTSD, how can we as social workers assist those? Do you think it's more on a policy side or more individual or community?
Probably both. It would be my response in terms of, policies are needed to at least open the gate. And from the other side of the coin, being able to perhaps reconnect, those individuals back at the VA or back with services, re-diagnosing, providing supportive evidence to substantiate, the misdiagnosis or the discharge that was erroneously filed. So, there are avenues to fight against or what's the word I'm looking for, Carl?
Or to get redressed.
To readdress those issues.
So, and you might want to comment about the repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell as well.
Yeah,
Sure.
because
And-
that's appropriate.
Right, and that's what happened. So a lot of people that were charged were given a dishonorable discharge, and so there's a legal means now to go back. There are organizations that help those individuals seek an honorable discharge because it makes a difference, right? If you go to try and find a job or seek benefits, there's a difference in having a dishonorable versus an honorable. So there are ways around it.
Appeal.
Well, thank you so much. Could everybody give our panel a round of applause, please? So in closing, I just want to finish where I started, and that is to thank all of you who are working on the Committee for All Schools Day to finally see the importance of reintegrating veterans and military families back home, and to see us as a diversity group that needs attention, and that you can put aside your opinions and beliefs and values around war and see that we're just folks who are doing what we've been asked to do. It may be difficult for us, it's difficult for our families, but it's the profession we chose, and we really appreciate your support when we come home. So thanks again.
Oh, great, everyone. Susan's given me a sign to say Dr. Hogue has his books, and if you got your books with you and you'd like Dr. Hogue to sign them quickly, please let us know. I think that's the best course of action, perhaps. Yes, and that will be done outside, because I know some of you have been reading his book and wanted it signed. All right, and I'm sure you'll agree that we've had a really good and interesting morning, and that it was great to have our own Anthony here today, Dr. Hassan, with the expertise that he has, and the panel, who's our very own people from the school as well, which is another plus, because it says that you could actually email people, you could actually email our faculty the questions that you weren't able to ask. I think that would be a good idea. Would you like that to happen? Yes, I think they would. Yes, thank you. Okay. All right, and again, a nice round of applause for our keynote speaker and everyone. And I'd like to ask Ali and Martina to the podium. Where are they? Oh, there you are. Okay, there you are. All right.
Hi, everybody. We really hope that you enjoyed this and found it thought-provoking. If you did, we hope that you will join us for the play that you've heard us discuss called Fit for Society. As was mentioned, it's beginning promptly at 12:30. Please, out of respect for the performers, be in your seat at that time if you join us, and for your own benefit as well, because it starts with a bang and you don't want to miss it. There are people dressed in black shirts, like mine, who are members of Student Org, who are happy to escort you to the MRF building. For those of you who don't know what MRF is, that's the main social work building. We're happy to take you over there. For those of you who do know where the building is, if you see students who are looking around and they look a little confused, remember that there are people here who may be here for the very first time on campus today. Please be nice and offer to take them over. That really, as a VAC student, I know that I really appreciated it the first time someone did that for me. It really means a lot. We are having a raffle, so if you go to the play, please be sure to get your ticket for that. Pick up your box lunch right outside of the auditorium. Head over to MRF room 340. And that's it. We really, really hope to see you there. For our VAC students who aren't here, we want you to see the play too. And you've received a link in the last hour by email. Please don't share the link out of respect for the performer's request. Please do not share that link, but please click on it. You'll enjoy it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for coming and fight on.